presentation is going to be very brief, but we're mainly here tonight to hear from you. And first of all, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for taking the time and coming tonight. At this time, what I'd like to do is ask the mayor to step up here very quickly and welcome the crowd. And if he has any brief comments he'd like to make, and after that, we'll get into the presentation.
They'll be very brief. I'd like to thank y'all for coming because we can't govern without your input. And the reason we're here tonight is to hear from you, as Don has said, and we welcome your comments. And when we're through and come up with a plan and we take it all into consideration, I can tell you, not everybody's going to be happy. But you can't make everybody happy. But we're going to try to do what's best for our community. Thank you for coming, and I'll give it back to Don.
Just so you know, for the record, if you can raise your hand, we have, it looks like we've got everybody here except for Councilmember McCullough. I think he's planning to be here. So we have Councilmember Thurber, we have Councilmember Talcott, Mayor Pro Tem White, and Councilmember Meek. So let's give them a round of applause. There you go. Also tonight we have Steve Coonan, and he is with the firm Allen Plummer, and they've been involved in our preliminary engineering work that we've done to get our application into the Water Development Board and to look at the wastewater solutions in this area. And my name is Don Ferguson, and I'm the city manager. Again, I'd like to start off just by telling you thank you very much for your time. This is a very important issue to this community, and it's been fun having the opportunity to visit with some of you who've been here for many, many years, who said when they moved to this community, this is a brewing issue some 10 years ago. That's very true. And we're hoping we're getting to a point where we're going to be able to bring some type of solution or resolution to this particular issue to try to keep our creek clean and to try to get to things looking forward to the future as far as downtown wastewater is concerned. You've had an opportunity to wander through the boards. We had a meeting back in December where we talked about the concept of discharging effluent into the Blanco River with whatever option we were looking at as far as wastewater. And one of the things that came up at that meeting was the discussion about how do we fund that? And how do we fund such a wastewater treatment plant, an environmentally right, if you will, treatment plant? And so there was discussion about ad valorem tax briefly at that meeting, and there's been subsequent discussion about that. I'm going to give you just kind of a brief history before we dive into the presentation. And that is, a lot of you probably have heard the discussion that was underway about the formation of a special taxing district, an MMD, or a municipal management district is what they call it. And there's been a movement afoot over the last 18 to 24 months among downtown business owners and downtown property owners to try to create a special taxing district that would basically set up a scenario to where individuals downtown would be taxed, and money from that tax, in addition to impact fees collected and revenues collected by the city, would go towards retiring the debt to build a system to serve the downtown area. There's strong feeling that downtown needs to pay its weight and needs to pay its fair share in this process. And I'm hearing that tonight, and I'm hoping we'll get some more input on your thoughts on that particular issue in this particular discussion that will follow. But about the MMD, there are two ways to create that municipal management district. And you can create it through the legislature, through legislation sponsored. And when you do that, you can customize that and set it up to the point where individuals, can vote not on non-uniform election days. You can set up certain provisions when certain things can go away, like taxes and things along those lines. You can customize it. And it's also probably the quickest way to get it set up, because once it's approved and once it's formed by the legislature, the only thing that remains is a vote by the people within that district on levying a tax, and they're down the road taking care of their business. The second way it can be created is through a petition process where that's submitted to the TCEQ. That is a much longer process. In December, the city was notified, after our meeting, the city was notified that Representative Isaacs has indicated he is not, at this stage of the game, open to supporting MMD legislation. So at this stage of the game, at least tonight, at 6:33, it appears the option of a legislatively created municipal management district whereby downtown property owners would basically fund a large portion of this project. It appears that option is out the door, which means it's to the TCEQ if that MMD is to be formed. As a result of that decision from Representative Isaacs, we sat down and looked at the process of creating that MMD through TCEQ. And to meet, in a conservative estimate, to meet the requirements set forth by TCEQ and by the state to create such a district, it appears that it will be at least 2 years before you would be able to get into a position to even have a vote to create and to tax within that district. And that has triggered tonight's meeting. The concern is you're going to have to wait at least 2 years to create that district. At the same time, you are polluting the creek with wastewater, which we've been doing for years, and we're seeing a continued decline in the water quality as a result of the problems we face downtown, which we'll talk about in a moment. So the council said, we need to be prudent and we need to see if there's a way this can be done quicker. Not abandon the MMD idea or the idea of the creation of some other type of special taxing district down the road, but the issue is timing, and the issue is trying to get something done now to get the process going. Because once you have your funding mechanism in place, you're still looking at probably an 18 to 24 month period for designing and construction of that system. So the idea is this: is there a way that we could fund and jumpstart the process now and get a solution in route? Or are we supposed to wait approximately 2 years to even get to a vote with no guarantee that the people will say yes in that vote, in that district? How long do we wait? How long do we pollute? How important is the environment to this community? How important is our downtown area to this community? And I think that's part of the issue that the council has been thinking about through their last discussions. The idea came up about the concept of they were wanting to tax themselves. Maybe the solution to this particular situation that we ought to be looking at and exploring is whether there's the potential for a citywide ad valorem tax to go ahead and jumpstart this process. And we're going to talk about that tonight, and we want your input on that tonight, and we want your honest input on that tonight. But I'll also say this: we want you to be polite, we want you to be courteous, and we want to be organized in that process. So I say that, and I know you all will. You were fantastic at the last meeting, but your input does count. It's very important to these council members, and they're here tonight to hear from you. No decisions being made tonight. There's another meeting that'll take place on the 20th, just like this meeting, with some updated information as we progress through this process. But the feeling was we need to start thinking about this idea, and if it's possible, go forward or rule it out, one way or the other, so we know how we're headed and which direction we're going. So with that, let's move very quickly into this presentation. I'm going to kind of run. Excuse me? Okay. Sure. Some of this is going to be repetitive to those of you who've attended a number of our meetings. Some of it will be brand new if you've not been able to come. But the issue at hand truly is the fact that bacteria levels in the Cypress Creek in central Wimberley are on the rise. We believe, and there seems to be evidence that failing septic systems are believed to be a major source of the pollutants in the Cypress Creek. Septic systems downtown. And we know that from looking at the test results on the Cypress Creek. The numbers are elevated at the test locations downtown, but upstream, the numbers are not elevated. And what we're seeing is we're seeing the elevation of those numbers consistent all the way to the point where they flow into the Blanco River. We're not seeing evidence of a strong decline. We're seeing evidence of a gradual increase in those bacteria levels. So the question comes up, fine, if you have septic systems downtown that have problems, what are you doing to try to identify and solve those problems? This city did not accept permitting responsibility until probably about 24 months ago from Hays County. Hays County was responsible for septic permitting, and a lot of the development you see took place prior to incorporation. And a lot of the septic systems were installed many, many, many years before incorporation. In fact, most of the septic systems in the downtown area, and that's the area we're talking about, is basically the area bounded by the Blanco River, Cypress Creek, Blue Hole, and 3237 back to Deer Creek. Most of the septic systems in that area, there's no evidence of any permit on file for any of those systems. They're that old. Back when a lot of those systems were installed, permitting was not required. A lot of development has occurred over the years, primarily prior to incorporation downtown, and we have a problem. And that is a lot of that development has eaten up a lot of the open space that's required for the drain fields needed for those septic systems. So for someone to come in and put a new septic system in, if we were to find one that was down, the chances aren't real good that they would be able to put one in that would comply with today's codes. That's just a fact of reality. We're trying to retrofit a developed downtown area, a historically developed downtown area with wastewater. It's a problem. And I think it's something that we have to understand also, and it is an area that right now sits on a karst topography. And if you're familiar with karst topographies, it's basically a stone base, and it's very difficult. The water doesn't flow from point A to point B like it would in a normal situation. It can flow all types of different directions and go all types of different places before it ever surfaces and ever ends up in the creek. You can have a leaking septic system on Ranch Road 12 over by Mr. Pitzer's place that could be leaking, into the creek over behind Idaho's. It's one of those situations, and he doesn't have a leaking septic system, Mr. Pitzer. I just want to point that out. But my point is, it's very, very difficult to try to identify where the problem is. We are trying. This month, we have initiated a new testing program where we are going to go in and we're going to try to look at markers of the water samples we pull to see if we can identify the content, to see if we can try to track down where that waste may be coming from. But what I'm telling you is, even in that situation, it is going to be very difficult, from a standpoint of identifying based on the topography. And once we do identify, it's going to be very hard for that system to come online in a proper standard, a compliance standard. So I think that's important to understand. We have close to 18 to 20 businesses downtown that have their systems pumped on a regular basis because they're not capable of handling their loads. We have a restaurant that's functioning right now on a wastewater permit that was issued many years ago for a real estate office. We had a restaurant up until a couple of months ago that was functioning with a porta potty as its sole restroom source. We have drain fields that have been covered over the years with asphalt. I had a gentleman earlier tonight walk up and he said, well, where are their septic systems? I don't see drain fields. Well, that's part of our problem. We have drain fields that are under buildings. We have drain fields that are under improvements. And we have some septic systems that can't even be found in the downtown area. When we go to people and we start looking at their property, they have restrooms, but where it's going, who knows? Because there's no system evident on that particular property. It is a very serious problem. And it's not a problem that is unique to this community. Older rural communities have this because of the lack of development control, over the years. What we're saying is we have a problem that we need to try to get on top of. We can't let it linger. Most of the septic systems that I mentioned are outdated. We talked about that. Many can't be replaced because the open space doesn't exist to bring them into compliance. This particular graph shows you what I'm talking about as far as the water quality issues we're dealing with. That upper line, I'm not going to play man of white here, but this purple line that goes to the peak, if you follow that line, that is an indication of the average bacteria levels in our testing that we have found on the Cypress Creek downtown. You can see it runs way ahead of most of the other sample sites. This dates all the way back. It's a 10-year snapshot. But you can see there is a solid problem with bacteria in the downtown area. These tests are conducted by individuals who have been trained, and the samples are analyzed at the Texas State Equitographer Research Data Center. They started off looking, I believe, initially at fecal, and they transitioned into E. coli. They're bacteria samples. Since 1971, the bacteria level in Cypress Creek in central Wimberley, and where we test in central Wimberley, just so you know, is right there at the Ranch Road 12 bridge, just on the west side of Ranch Road 12. Over there behind the lodge, over there, the log homes on the west side of the square. Since 1971, the bacteria level in Cypress Creek in central Wimberley has exceeded the level considered to be off limits for public contact recreation more than 30 times. This is a once-a-month sample that's taken 8 months out of the year. That's a troubling number, folks, because there are people downstream in close proximity to that sampling point that own property who swim in that creek. We deal with the odors. We've all smelled the odors downtown. And this water's going straight down into the Blanco and headed downstream. The problem continues to grow. We have to do something to try to curb this particular issue. The solution is really somewhat obvious, and it's the development of a wastewater collection system to serve the properties in central Wimberley and eliminate that reliance on individual septic systems. The benefits should be relatively clear to us all, and that is a wastewater system will help eliminate the growing public health and environmental threat on the Cypress Creek and the existing risk of groundwater contamination tied to failing septic systems. There are reports out there that show the significant benefits as far as recharge goes to the Trinity when it comes to the Blanco and to other streams in this particular area. So we're not just talking surface water, we're talking groundwater contamination potentially. Wastewater service in central Wimberley will foster responsible future development in the business center of our community. Let me say something about this, and I'm extremely sensitive on this one because we don't want our community to turn into some urban mecca or some true suburb of Austin, St. Marcus, or San Antonio. But I'm going to tell you, not having central wastewater downtown, that is not the solution to keep it from turning into that. Quite frankly, wastewater can help you manage your growth a little bit better. What solves your growth management issue is putting the development standards in place and the zoning standards in place and enforcing those to make sure that you are able to deal with those particular issues, whether it be aesthetics, whether it be lot size limitations, whatever. So it will foster responsible development, we believe, in the business center of the community. And the provision of wastewater service to central Wimberley will help preserve the unique character and quality of life in our community, which fuel our local economy and enhance local property values. It was very interesting standing over here at this board tonight and hearing individuals talk about the fact that, it's not my problem. It's their problem. I understand why you would say that, but I ask you to take a step back and recognize the fact that it is a community problem. It truly is a community problem. That's not what we're about, is shoving a problem off. It's a community problem. Downtown is a major economic generator for this community, whether you like it or not. They generate sales tax dollars, which we rely on in large part to fund our city services. If the problem continues to worsen, and we start having to address seriously our business population down there because of failing septic systems, which quite frankly we're headed in that direction, we'll talk about that in a minute, that's going to start having an impact on your sales tax base. And then when it comes time to provide certain services, folks, we're going to need to find a way to get the money to provide those services. It's important to realize the economic benefit of downtown. It's also important to realize the benefit when it comes down to your property values. If you did not have downtown Wimberley and the quaint character of downtown Wimberley, your tourism population goes down, it becomes less of a destination community, and when that attraction factor is not there, and when the economic generation is not there in that downtown area, folks, that has an impact on your property values. That's important to understand. Just like, and I'll say this, just like the development of a wastewater system is going to have an impact on property values in large part on the downtown area. But the downtown business owners we've been talking to, a lot of them seem to understand that and respect that and have no problem with that. Keep that in mind. We're not talking about a wide-scale increase in property values because of a downtown wastewater system. The people who are going to get hit with the increase in property values are going to be those folks immediately downtown who have that system, who are benefiting from that system. This community benefits as a whole, each and every one of you. It really does. Each and every one of you see a benefit from a vibrant downtown. And that's, I think, what we're talking about from that perspective. So recognizing the benefits and recognizing the needs, the city has explored several options to bring wastewater to the downtown area. Option one is for a larger plant, a 100,000 gallon plant, that's 100,000 gallons a day, activated sludge, and we would use the effluent produced, which would be a type 2 effluent, to subsurface irrigate the soccer fields and other areas of the park. The cost of that plant is $8.5 million. The feeling seems to be at this stage of the game that that may be overkill. In more ways than one problem. Option two, Option 1, by the way, calls for the construction of a new plant. Option 2 calls for the expansion of the existing plant to a capacity of 75,000 gallons a day. Right now, our plant is permitted at 15,000 gallons a day. That's our state permit. So you'd be increasing that to 75 to handle the additional waste from downtown. It does not include any type of wetlands. It does not include any type of additional storage. The method is tertiary, which means you're going to be producing a higher quality of effluent, one that you can have public contact with without fear of harm. And in this particular option, we would still subsurface irrigate the soccer fields and other areas. There would be no discharge. The cost of that option is $6.8 million. These particular options are total project cost estimates, engineering, construction, everything. Option 3 involves expanding the existing plant, again to 75,000 gallons a day. This plant would include the development of a wetlands area on the park side, where you would basically be discharging effluent into that wetlands area. It in effect becomes a park feature that actually has environmental benefits because it helps scrub that effluent and it helps in the treatment process. It also includes additional storage, up to 500,000 gallons of storage, and we're going to talk about why. It involves the disposal of the effluent in a reuse fashion, spray irrigation of the soccer fields and other areas in the park. And then we have under effluent stream discharge, yes, effluent discharge into Deer Creek in times of extremely wet weather. Let me talk to you about that for a minute. The reason we have 500,000 gallons of storage in this option is the result of our last meeting where we talked about the fact that there was interest in hiking up the storage to try to minimize the need for any discharge. You're also having the wetlands as another way to store and to treat. So this particular option has been hiked up with the intent of trying to minimize the times that you would discharge. As we talked at our last meeting, without the additional storage, without the wetlands, the risk of discharge of a very high-grade treated effluent, the risk of discharge is only really a couple of days a year when we look at the average rainfall in this particular area. And at time we would discharge would be times where we had extreme rainfall and the water levels in the Blanco and in the Cypress Creek and in Deer Creek would be flowing at extreme levels. So that's something to think about. Wetlands, additional storage, hopefully reducing the risk of discharge even further than what we've been talking about. That particular option runs the cost of about $4.7 million. Option 4 is basically option 3 without the wetlands. It has the additional storage we built in that cost based on the input we had. Again, we're going to spray irrigate the soccer fields. And again, effluent discharge only in times of extremely wet weather. And option 5 is the Aqua Texas option, and this one probably deserves some explanation. Aqua Texas right now is authorized to serve customers on the north side of the creek, north side of Cypress Creek. The Brookshire Brothers side of the creek is another way to look at it. We have the authorization to serve the customers on the south side. They can't come into our area, we can't go into their area. They already have a wastewater treatment plant. So, trying to be fair in our exploration of the various options that exist, we felt we needed to look into the possibility of what happens if we built a collection system and tied in to their treatment plant. Would they be willing to be our wholesale processor? We would not get the benefit of any effluent, which we need in the park for reuse and in other areas. But we would still be in a relationship where they would treat our wastewater. We would not have to build the plant. We would still be on the hook for building $3 million worth of a collection system. That money's going to have to come from somewhere. But it eliminates basically the need for a treatment plant. This particular number is going to change in our next presentation because we have just received information from Aqua Texas that we have been trying to get for the last 6 months. And they dropped it on us at the last minute, and we'll update our charts to show the impact of that. This number has assumptions in it because of the lack of information that was provided. That said, it's important to understand that you will be their customer as far as the wholesale treatment cost is concerned. which means that's a cost that would get, they'd bill us. We'd get a bill for treating everyone's waste, and then we would pass that bill on through our monthly situation. They talked in their proposal about some minimal rate guarantees, but at the end we would have no final rate control as far as their package goes. But we're in the middle of going over their particular letter, and we'll be updating our numbers for the next presentation. But the cost of theirs with the assumptions was 7.6. That number will come down a little bit. So how do we finance the solution? And that's really what we're here to talk about tonight. This city does not have $7 million in the bank. Few cities our size do. Even those cities with property taxes. Cities this size typically don't have that type of money sitting around in the bank to do something like this. So we have to go out and find funding. Our funding source, we have looked for grants. One of the problems we run into is grant funding is on the decline right now because of everything that's happening from a federal government standpoint. And most of the grant money you get, you have to match 50%, 60%, 40%. It's not free money like it used to be many, many years ago. We don't think we're in the grant market, but we're going to try. So grant money's out there. There's also the possibility of loan money. And it's a matter of finding the cheapest money out there. And right now, the cheapest money out there appears to be through the Water Development Board. And we have an application before that board right now to fund the design and engineering of a wastewater system. It's about a $650,000 loan. Again, that cost is included in the total project cost that we presented tonight, so I want you to understand that. But in order to get the loan, folks, you've got to have security. And that security cannot be sales tax revenue. Because sales tax revenue, as we talked earlier, is what? It's fluid. It changes. There's no guarantee that that money's going to be there. You have to have a resource or a funding source that you can rely on if you have to rely on it to go get the money to make your debt payment. That means you have to have an ad valorem tax. You can't put up buildings for collateral. You know, you can't go out and figure out other innovative ways to try to meet their collateral requirements. They're pretty straightforward about the fact that you need to have the security in place. So the question is, how do we do it? We don't have an ad valorem property tax right now in the city. That's why we're here tonight. We talked earlier about the MMD was one way to create that ad valorem tax base to go towards it. We talked about the status of that situation. We need to have some type of ad valorem backup. The concern we have is this, and that is, we talked earlier, it could take 2 years to create this MMD vehicle that was discussed. Do we wait on that process, or do we look at some other alternative, like a citywide ad valorem tax, to help jumpstart this process? Once approved, the collection of a citywide property tax to help fund the development of a wastewater system could begin as early as 9 months from now. There's some things we need to understand about what we're talking about as far as this particular idea. And that is the fact that if we get the loan from the Water Development Board to develop this system, which we think there is a high likelihood we can get full project funding for, if we're able to show them the security exists. The thing to understand is there is a bond that is issued in conjunction with that funding agreement. Okay? It's just like a bond. A bond that would build a school, a bond that would build streets or drainage. The language in that bond reflects the tax rate and reflects the tax obligation. Once that bond is retired, translation, once the debt is paid off, the tax rate goes away. It is the same thing you see from a school district standpoint, and that is you have a debt service side of your tax rate, and then you have the M&O side. The M&O side doesn't go away, it typically goes up. But ideally, and the way it's supposed to work, is when the improvement is made and paid for, that tax obligation goes away. Your tax rate should come down. as far as your overall school tax. In this situation, once the system is built and paid for, not operating costs, but once it's built and paid for, the thought process is that tax goes away. Another thing you have to keep in mind is the numbers that we're about to show you and the numbers you've seen over here, for modeling purposes for discussion tonight only, not a proposal. But we felt like we needed to see what the cost would be if the system was to be funded with a full property tax. Translation, no contribution from other sources to retire that debt. So the numbers you see right now are what it would cost if the city was to go ahead and levy that tax across the entire populace to fund the system equally, with nobody paying more. I can tell you right now, that is not going to fly. The city council has no intention of doing that based on the discussion they had the other night. Their feeling is that if something like this were to ever come to be, as far as the property tax, that there's going to need to be some evidence that the folks downtown who are using the system and benefiting directly from the system would pay more. That money could be collected through impact fees when they connect to the system. It's based on an LUE. You hear that number kicked around a lot. And some businesses are looking at potential impact fees in the neighborhood of $15,000 to $20,000, depending on what that number comes to. But with 100+ properties downtown, you can see how much revenue that would generate and bring that tax obligation down. You have the ability, and most utilities do this in their base monthly fees. There's an element in that base monthly fee that a utility customer pays to go towards capital recovery and to go towards capital projects. So they could be assessed, they, not you, unless you're a downtown property owner, but they could be assessed as part of their monthly fees, a capital recovery fee, to go even further towards retiring the potential obligation on the citywide tax. So I want you to understand that number, that obligation you see, is a high number and will more than likely come down once decisions are made if we end up going this particular route. It's just reality. But we felt it was fair to bring this number to you in full so you could work down off that number. So keep that in mind as we start looking at some of these numbers and begin working through this process. It's possible you could create another type of special taxing district. But it wouldn't be a tax, it would be an assessment. But at this stage of the game, that's not on the table, but it could be on the table as another way to further reduce this obligation. There's a big difference between assessments and taxes and how they're collected and how delinquency is collected. And that is some of the things that we can talk about at some other meeting if we decide to start talking about the idea of another type of special district. But that idea is out there. I'm not talking M&D, I'm talking about maybe another animal that could help go into paying for this particular project. So let's look at the projected impact of a citywide ad valorem tax. One of the things we felt you needed to see is how that tax would look applied to all of the options. Okay? Option one, which was the big plant, brand new plant we talked about. Estimated cost of $8.5 million. Based on a 4% interest rate over 20 years, which quite frankly is a high interest rate in today's market. We right now are looking at significantly lower interest rates at the Water Development Board, but we were trying to be conservative and trying to be realistic. You're going to have a debt service obligation of about $628,000. To generate that type of money off a citywide property tax would require about a 14-cent tax rate, and on the average $250,000 property, home if you will, $357 would be the annual tax payment with the 14-cent tax rate. Option two, you're looking at an 11-cent tax rate, $286.50. Option three, which is the wetlands option, is $4.7 million, an 8-cent tax rate. And again, this is assuming that everybody is paying the whole ticket. There's no contribution extra over and above from downtown. $186 a year. That's option 4. Option 3 was $200 a year. And then option 5, and again, that number will come down, no doubt, about $321 with the assumptions as far as the cost goes. The thing to keep in mind is the above-mentioned ad valorem rates are based on a citywide net taxable property value, which is what we're at right now, of about $439 million. Also, the tax obligation, as I've mentioned several times, assumes the entire project cost is funded via the ad valorem tax. And as I mentioned also, revenue collected from wastewater impact fees and monthly wastewater service fees, and even revenue from maybe some other district at some point in the future could go towards lowering this number considerably. You could see that number go down as much as 50%, if not greater, depending on how this council, if they choose to go this route, decides to share that obligation with downtown versus with the entire city. So that's the snapshot. It's very, very important that we hear from you and that we understand your thoughts as far as that situation goes. And Steve, if I can get you maybe to step over here, I've got next to Mike. We're going to ask everyone who would like to speak to go ahead. We got conflicting signals. I'm going to yell real loud. We're going to ask everyone who would like to speak to line up over here, and when you speak, would you please give us your name for the record and whether you live inside the city limits or outside the city limits. I think that would be interesting for everybody to hear. Understand this property tax, if it were to be imposed, would only be imposed on property within the city limits. Not in the city's ETJ, it would only be within the city limits. This also, the thing you've got to keep in mind is there are exemptions and things like that that can start to play in and the city can put in place on certain parts of your tax revenue. So again, we're trying to give you a model, a broad snapshot model to be thinking about to gain some input. Do you feel downtown should pay more? How much more? Are you opposed to helping out with what we see as a community problem? You know, those are the type of things I think we're interested in hearing from tonight and getting your honest thoughts. Again, let's be polite. Let's not throw jabs. Just kind of give us your honest opinion. Line up if you could, please, if you want to speak right over here, and we will proceed.
Hi, I'm Renee Barsher, and I live on the Blanco River in the city limits. And first I want to say that I really appreciate all the work you're doing, looking at the pros and cons of this endeavor. I myself am totally in favor of paying higher taxes on infrastructure, which I see this as an infrastructure project, as long as the environment is the #1 consideration. That said, I would definitely support #3 with the wetlands, because I think that for another $14 a year is definitely what I'm for. And thanks again.
Thank you very much. And Don, I think you did a wonderful presentation of one side. Congratulations. I don't think I'll take a half an hour. If I miss something, it's because I don't hear real well, and you talk a little fast for me. But I did jot down some notes. What is the problem? The problem is the danger of health. Due to what reason? It's due to the septic tank leaks on the square. Now I'm quoting the Wimberley View. Now that you've changed papers, anyway, whose responsibility is it? It used to be the Hayes County Environmental Health Department. And the city now is responsible for the polluted creek and the health danger that Steve Thurber talked about in the paper the other day. And so the results, according to the paper, a dangerous health threat. It leads to the square property owners risking are closing due to the failing septic tank system. And it also, they cannot sell or expand their business until they comply with septic requirements. So if that's the reason that we want to cure the health, I think a bunch of us think it is important to do something else. Now, sewer system will do it in time, sure. But in the history of this town, we have had this problem before, as you stated. But do you know what we did? Why didn't you tell them? We called on the health department. They told us what the requirements were. And we had a group of volunteers all down the creek and all down the river to keep their eyes open one day, and we flushed every toilet in the square at 9 a.m. in the morning. Gene Williams, who had a lot of experience in the water world, masterminded that. We found out where the leaks were, and Mr. Sheffield's tank was closed. Steve Pepper expanded his system. Mavis Woolsey bought a vacant lot to put in a septic tank. Whatever was in Kistacook dug up theirs and redid that. And they passed the requirements. Now, if our tanks are leaking and we check the part every Monday morning for bacterial danger, why don't we check it Saturday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when it's used, when people are in the water? Let's be fair about what kind of figures we're quoting here. Well, anyway, there's solutions. By the way, also in the 70s or 80s, whenever it was, we built what the senior citizens called the VIP building that stood for very important potties. It's now the Chamber of Commerce building, but there are a whole lot of commodes there. And that was because the square was short. Some older people remember that. Well, solutions to the problem might be to cut back on basic city services. That was in the paper. Are you going to cut back on the telephone or the water? I can't think of the city services where that would make much difference. In fact, I can't think of the city services. The city might enforce septic tank ordinances. Think so? We might go into debt for the square merchant's success and have an ad valorem tax, and we all have to square out and send millions of gallons of water. I didn't hear where you said put it more on the soccer field. Anyway, there are other solutions that are illogical because people have a preference against Aqua Texas. But if we had a few septic tanks in town connect up with Aqua Texas, run over here to the pump station, wouldn't that help? Thank you.
You ought to know he's been here a long time. Yes, he has. For those of you I'm Clint Franklin, and I live 17 feet outside the city limits. Best 17 feet I can manage. However, I do, unfortunately, own acreage tracts inside the city limits. I would like to say that for those of you who maybe have come here a little late as far as the incorporation is concerned, there was a pledge by the Vanguard group who wanted to incorporate this town, that this town was founded and incorporated on no property taxes, on sales taxes only. Now, many of us way back then, and I'm going back, I've been on the property here for 43 years. I can recall 30 years ago, when they were making rumblings about incorporating, we knew then, we knew back then, they would someday want the mechanics to put a sewer system down on their square. And it's taken 30 years, here they are, and now they want to do away with the pledge. Now, as I understand it, according to the newspaper that you no longer sanction, that there's 144 members in this special sanitation district. And according to that article I read, only 8 of those 144 don't comply with the sanitation standards set forth. So here we are now with 8 entities, and we're going to have this great big issue. So maybe something should be addressed. It would be cheaper to close those 8. They must be very small operations. But anyway, I seriously question some of the figures that I see here based on Aquatech. Now, I know Aquatech is not private, especially up in Wood Creek North. But I think that we owe it to ourselves to have the president or somebody in the hierarchy of Aquatech give them a chance to come down here and give a presentation that they're accountable for, so it's not filtered through some biases that I know go on here. Now, I was appointed to the wastewater committee along with some others, about 3 years ago, maybe 4. I have not been called in the last 2 years. I've not been consulted on this. We have one staff member on that committee who's a qualified sanitation engineer. They only hear from her. So I would say that there needs to be a lot more study done here, and I don't like studying things to death. But I think architects might be a viable solution for us if we can work out a contract with them that we can live with. Because it certainly would cost a fraction of what it would cost to build our own system. And all the tearing up that they're going to have to do running that line out of that blue hole, and pretty soon that blue hole may be a black hole, financially. I'm so sick and tired of those damn soccer fields that nobody's played on today. They probably never will play on. And as far as getting money for the project, whether you go with Aquatech or you don't go with Aquatech, friends, they can't get a loan, and they talk about collateral. Your homes will be the collateral. Those bonds will be backed up by liens on your property. If you can't pay the extra freight, they'll take it. They'll take your home, just like the school district will take your house. They close businesses in this town, and people have lost their homes in this town just because of school tax. And now you want to saddle yourself with another lien on your property that will benefit those people downtown. Now, it's nice to have a nice little quaint village. When I came here 43 years ago, this was a ghost town. There was one viable business on the square. The rest of them were all vacant and for sale. I was just as happy as a clam here. There's a lot of old timers who are still happy. So I don't wish any ill to the newcomers to come here and set up a little mom and pop shop down there. But if they can't afford to call it, they need to get out of that business. And here we have new homes that are constructed now. The county will not let you put in a conventional system. So you're going to spend $12,000 to $15,000 on an aerobic system for your house, and nobody's going to help you pay for that, I can tell you. But yet people down on the square don't want to pay or can't pay freight, and they want you to share with them. So as far as I'm concerned, I would get Mr. I forgot what the name of the president of Aquatech, but I talked to him on the phone 3 years ago, and he said, we can do that for a fraction of what you people can spend on your own system. So I just would say, give that some consideration and invite those folks here for a town hall. Thank you.
Real quickly, just a couple of responses on a couple of those things. Number one, it's not just big people. I don't think anybody can put a finger right now at this stage of the game on how many trouble systems truly exist down there, and that's part of the problem we're up against, number one. Number two, the Aquatech option, Mr. Laughlin was invited by Councilmember Talcott and members of the City Council to come and present, and that is what triggered this latest surge of information that came in at the last minute prior to tonight's meeting. The thing, as I stressed, it's very, very important to understand is you still have a collection system, and at the end of the day, in the grand scheme of these options that are up here on the table, that collection system is about $3 million in cost. So keep in mind, you're going to have to come up with that collection system. They're not building the collection system for you. They will at their price, but it's still a $3 million collection system. The plan is not the expensive element in this total equation.
My name is Charles Lancaster, I live at 1650 White Acres Road. Don, I appreciate you got an Aggie over there rattling the saber. You did a good job. I don't really understand why we try to operate like our government does, because it seems here lately that everything is an immediate demand. We've got to do it now, or we can't get it done. The permit that we keep talking about, when the city bought the sewer plant for Dipper, was specifically for the permit itself. You didn't really want to operate that thing. If you sit in a septic system out here, you're going to have a licensed operator to it. Either that or you're going to farm it out. You're going to cost more money that way. A septic system, when you put it in, regardless of what people say, your lines are going to leak. You're going to have lift stations. You're going to have power outages. Sewer is going to back up. It's going to become a bigger problem because you're going to collect all of it instead of just a little bit of it. And it's going to all pump right into the creek. It's going to come down South Creek. It's going to go into Lake River. It's going to affect all of it, not just a part of it. Our federal government wants to distribute our wealth to those people who don't have it. Well, unlike our city, we're now wanting to distribute the expense to the few that don't have it, being our septic system. I don't like the system. It said that the sewer is needed to water the soccer fields. I think at the last meeting that was said that that was one of the main things that they wanted to do originally, was to have a septic system that was going to operate the water system on the soccer fields. I never heard that. That was the first time I heard it. The ad valorem tax is being pushed because some people don't even live in the city. They'll never pay for it. They'll never put a penny into it. I don't think that we need to go that route. They say that the tax will go away. I'm going to ask each and every one of you right here, right now. I don't need a show of hands, but I want you to think about this. How many taxes have been implemented that went away when it was paid for? I don't think it's going to happen there, and I don't think it'll happen here. It's going to always come up that we're going to have something else to spend it for. I, for one, I don't need an ad valorem tax that's going to pay for somebody else that I don't get the use out of. If we had a system that was set up for the downtown, we keep talking about the central water system. If we have a process that's going to pay for that, and that alone, and not go pumping anywhere between $4 and $8 million out there to the sky, I might go along with an ad valorem tax that would help pay for that, that's going to ship it out. Other than that, I don't think I can have it. Thank you.
The next speaker comes up a couple of points. The concept that Charlie pointed out about the irrigation being needed for the park, it was in the city's original park master plan, and I think it's important to understand that that whole park has been built around sustainability and resource recovery. And then as far as the situation of discharge, as we talked about rather lengthy the last time, we truly believe we have enough irrigation space, and quite frankly, may not have enough water to handle the irrigation space that we have at the park on a daily basis that we're going to want to water. So I think the use is going to be significant. You know, the concept of effluent discharge, again, is an extreme rainfall situation when you would not be able to irrigate. And we've got to look at ways to try to minimize that if we're going to follow that route as much as possible and make sure whatever goes in is the cleanest possible. Sorry.
Hello, I'm Les Harwell. I live in the city. I live down on River Meadows Road, off of River Road. My back fence is the city limits, as a matter of fact. Looking at all the options that have been presented here, I personally could only afford option 3 or 4 as far as additional ad valorem tax. And I think if we do a property tax, that this ought to go to a vote to the people. Even though it might be a decision starting with the city council connected, I think the citizens deserve to vote on it if they're going to get a property tax. And in order to reduce that property tax, I think we've got to have some sort of impact fee, a substantial fee of $10,000 or so for each time, so that the people that are benefiting put more into the game, so that they've got more skin in the game than everybody else. And once again, I have to support other speakers that are extremely reluctant to do the property tax move, because once it's there forever. And there might be other good uses that come up in the future, but like they said, the tax never goes away. But if we do have one, let's go for option 3 or 4 and minimize the payment. Sorry.
Stress is the fact that these numbers are funding it fully with property tax citywide. The numbers are anticipated to go down based on whatever contribution is determined to be made from the downtown property. Go ahead.
My name is Alice Whiteman. I live on the Blanco River, down below Los Alamos Creek. I guess my point is this. I understand the problem. I sympathize with downtown. One of the questions that, since I live in Wimberley, was who's going to pay for this? And this is the question before us tonight. It seems to me that we're going from one point to another point that we're not ready for yet. And I'd like to suggest an alternative, which these numbers don't make look favorable. And that is to put in a collection system and tie into the Aqua Texas system and see if we really need a wastewater treatment plant. I'm not sold on it. I don't know that we need that capacity. But since we have the problem, this seems to be the shortest way, the fastest way to deal with it. Yes, there's a collection system. I wouldn't be opposed to having a tax for that. These figures for option 5 are way out of whack. But again, the downtown people benefit for it. They pay the rates to Aqua Texas. We understand Aqua Texas is considering a district-wide rate. We don't know what it is, or I'm not privy to that. But to me, let's do this in stages. Instead of going from A to Z, let's go to A, B, C, and see what we need before we take on debt that a community of 2,626 people, it's a big deal for this size community. So I suggest that you do it slowly, that you really explore the Aqua Texas option. It would soothe a lot of ill feeling in the community that somebody benefits while you pay, and socializing the cost and privatizing benefits. So I do support the idea of district. I do support the idea of solving the problem, but I think we should do it in a way that people who benefit also pay, and that are willing to help for what's needed, not necessarily for a wastewater treatment plant. We're not sure we're going to need, we don't know what's going to happen in world affairs, and that's going to have an impact on us here. You know, the euro, put online. Any number of things can happen. The financial situation in the world is not going to solve. So to take on a big debt for something that, may not fit the situation. So let's do it in increments as opposed to doing it in one base. Thank you.
just inside.
Hold it close.
And the term citywide, I like that very much. But are you really intending to tax the people on the north side of the creek who do not benefit from this as this wastewater system and who are paying for wastewater system owned by,
The answer to that question is absolutely yes. And as we talked about earlier, there's an indirect benefit that everybody in this community, regardless of what side of the creek they live on, they benefit from a vibrant downtown with wastewater system. So yes.
I totally agree with you on that. I think that's one of the problems, assumptions that the whole program started with, saying only downtown folks benefit. But, so I'm 100% in favor of that. But different people are going to benefit in different reasons. And certainly people on the north side of the creek, I'm not one of them who are not going to be happy about paying as much as everybody else. Thank you.
My name is Buck Kite. I live here in Wimberley city limits. I've got 2 points I'd like to make. First of all, I do not like the idea. And here you I do not like the idea of the council imposing property tax without going to a vote. I do not think unilaterally should have that ability. Second of all, I think more effort has to be done with the MMD. If the only thing standing in the way is Congressman Isaac, get Congressman Isaac down to this meeting. Let him hear from his constituents. I understand the MMD correctly. That basically says the cost and the benefit is done by the people in that district, primarily the square, and all the people living on the north and the south side. Cypress Creek will not be paying tax. So I think more effort needs to be put into exploring MMD.
Okay, right. Let me expound for just a moment while the next speaker comes up on this concept of the public vote. And it is kind of one of the strange things that exists. We're a small general law city, and we don't have what's called initiative and referendum capabilities like you see in Austin or San Antonio. I think San Marcos has it. A lot of home rule cities have it, which are larger cities. We don't have that ability to put an issue on the ballot and let the people say, do you want to be taxed or not? We don't have that ability to do that. What can happen in this process is if there's a decision to entertain this concept and to proceed with this process of citywide taxation. As I mentioned earlier, it will be bond funded. There will be a bond issued in this particular situation that is tied to that tax rate. There is a way for a public vote to occur on that bond, and by consideration of that bond, you indirectly are voting on the tax. So the thing to understand is there is an avenue out there if that ends up being the route that exists, and that's just the way it is. But to actually have the way the laws work right now, you don't have a public vote per se on a tax rate. The city council sets that by an ordinance. You elect the city council members. So you do have the ultimate say in one way or the other. So the thing to keep that in mind is the fact that, it is a council action, but there is a public vote option through a bond issue.
My name is Steve Dunks. I'm Miss May's Barbecue here in town. I live 12 miles north of town. I don't have the opportunity to vote on whether or not anything happens or doesn't happen. I told Don that I really take a risk at even showing up here tonight to voice my opinion because I don't want to make any of y'all mad. This community's been great to me. Y'all have supported me for many, many years, supported my grandmother. It seems to me when some of these projects come up, somebody took common sense, put it in a folder, and they filed it somewhere and forgot what they did with it. Mr. Carson is putting the business in on the north side of the creek here. He didn't have any problem getting his system put in. He got an easement. He drilled underneath the road. He put in the whole line to connect into Aqua, Texas. Somehow or another, we got to figure out how we can get a system put in downtown and do it without affecting everybody in the whole community. If my system goes out tomorrow, which it's been there for 15 years, it's still operating properly. I've got warning signals on it. It's operating the way it's supposed to. If it goes out tomorrow, you know what my option is? Put in a new system or drill underneath the road and hook up to Aqua, Texas. You know how long it's going to take me to do that? Not very long, because I got to stay in business. We just need to come up with some common sense solutions.
My name is Gail Pig, and I live at 2214 Flight Acres in the city. Can you hear me? Do the numbers that are shown on the options include administrative, operations, and maintenance costs?
No, those numbers involve engineering, design, and construction. The operation is a separate thing.
How much would the operations and maintenance of a wastewater treatment plant be and administrative costs?
What the city is currently paying, we pay right now for the plant we have, we pay $60,000 a year. And you know, with a larger plant, it would go up some, and there would be some additional cost in operating the collection system. So, you know, maybe around $100,000 a year or thereabouts. And the thing to keep in mind is, just for point of reference, the estimates we've gotten from Aqua, Texas in this last bit of information they gave us call for an annual fee far greater than that $100,000 a year to process the wastewater. So just keep in mind there's two elements in that bill that the customer will pay on a monthly basis. There's a capital element, and then there's that M&O element, the maintenance and operation Gail talks about. And the customers pay that, not the citizens.
And how many FTEs would be included? Would there be additional FTEs required for the city?
No, I would envision that if we were going to the business, my recommendation from the manager's standpoint to council would be that we would RFP and contract out the operation of the plant. We're not interested in adding full-time staff here in City Hall.
Do the costs include removal of nitrogen and phosphorus?
These costs do not include nutrient removal.
There's been a recent study in 2011 by Dr. Ross, and she did a study of disposal of wastewater effluent over the Edwards Aquifer recharge zone related to Barton Springs and Edwards Aquifer. But it showed that even if there is the options that do not discharge, they only are land applied, i.e. watering soccer fields, that it has a negative effect on water quality. That there's excessive nitrogen and phosphorus, and you end up with creeks and rivers that look like Kermit the Frog's, you know, slimy frog pond. And that's what it looks like downstream of where wastewater effluent is discharged too. So if those costs don't include that, that's a water quality issue. We've also talked about how all the plant options there, they do not remove pharmaceuticals, they don't remove metals, they don't remove household cleaners, and that type of stuff is a water quality issues. I think right next to Blue Hole and along Cypress Creek, I don't think we would have ever, if we were looking for a site for a wastewater treatment plant, I think that would be the last site on earth that we would pick. The soccer fields are right next to the creek, so we are going to need to consider that as a non-monetary. There's monetary and there's non-monetary. And so that's a non-monetary issue that I think it sounds like the community is interested in being addressed. Got my notes. I'm a little nervous here, sorry. Another non-monetary issue is schedule. Which option can you get done the fastest? Well, Aqua Texas already has a plant. They've already got a system right across the creek. Steve brought up a very good point about the leaning pair managing to expand and be in business. Have you thought about releasing the CCN? Cities make deals with CCNs all the time with other entities. You could give up your CCN in the square and let Aqua Texas serve directly, and then you wouldn't need to come to any of these people for any money. It'd be like everybody on the other side of the creek. About that, could you answer?
Sure. This city fought long and hard a few years back to secure that CCN. And I think from a standpoint of customer protection, which our city has an obligation to provide, that was the right decision. To relinquish the CCN, the authority to serve a particular area where you will have no rate control and no rate protection for the customer is really not a smart move.
It's all about the money, not about the creek.
No, not at all. That's a side issue.
What about the citizens of Wimberley that live on the other side of the creek that pay for Aqua Texas? They're your customers too, and if you have more customers added to that, it reduces their cost.
Well, not completely with the rate structure that they're looking at this stage of the game. Our feeling is we need to maintain the CCN from that perspective. Also a quick clarification, that is the soccer fields are not located next to the creek. If there's any kind of overflow from that plant, that overflow is more apt to go in Deer Creek and flow into Blanco than it is to go down to the side of the creek.
The soccer field runoff?
It is on the upper part of the park, not the lower part.
But once it gets into the ground, like you said, we've got karst topography. That's one of the things brought up in the report. It can go anywhere. And it could make the blue hole in every Cypress Creek look like a slime pit.
My belief would be the fact that we would not be permitted by the state to allow that.
That's what a lot of creeks look like downstream of wastewater treatment plant discharges that don't remove phosphorus and nitrogen, because costs don't do that. The cost for Aqua Texas, that's based on taking a line all the way to the plant. We've acknowledged that that's wrong, but what concerns me is that we're so far down the road in a process, and I have been asking about that option for a very long time. We've been working on this for 2 years, and we still don't have an accurate number before we come and talk about ad valorem taxes to people. We haven't, as a city, been able to work a deal out to get a number from Aqua Texas while we've got customers on the other side of the creek that are served by them.
Yeah, we've actually had, we've been trying for several years to get a firm cost from them, and quite frankly, what they provided for us is probably the closest thing that they've tried over the years. So the answer to the question is, we have tried, they have not been responsive, and now we've just gotten what we feel is parts of the responsibility.
The main work on these options has been done. I want to add, Alan Plummer didn't have anything to do with the cost on option 5. That was developed by someone else. So just didn't want to cast any aspersions on you. You did a great job, Steve. So these have been developed primarily by a very small group of people and not really vetted by the entire community. In fact, I brought up at the last public meeting that the Water and Wastewater Advisory Board has never met on this issue, and I'd like to give you or any of the council members the opportunity. How long ago was that meeting? Why have they still not been brought together to look at these options from the standpoint of a bigger group of the community rather than the downtown businesses' perspective?
I'll I'll answer it's a council decision. I'll answer based on my understanding. And my understanding is that this council ended up in the middle of this issue, at the forefront of this issue, when the decision was made to move forward and acquire the GVRA plant, and has been trying to move this vehicle forward with their effort and their leadership. That's why we're where we are today as far as getting to the point of trying to secure a loan and talking about how we're going to long-term finance that situation. I feel very comfortable based on the discussions I've heard at this stage of the game that upon development of any such system, that advisory board is going to play an integral part in the oversight of the operation and the recommendation of rates and the review of rates and operating costs related to that plant. But at this stage of the game, they're far enough in the middle of the mix right now with the state and the Water Development Board that it really is probably going backwards at this stage of the game where they are in the process.
Is it true that the application is very specific to the option and the cost of the option, and council has really already recommended option 4, which the cost is in the application, and it all jives with option 4?
The application requires you to submit the concept that you are looking at the time. It does not prohibit that once you get into the design and development phase, the possibility of changing that option and reorganizing your financial picture, provided the security's there, and provided you're not exceeding the amount of their loan. They're pretty flexible. They're involved in that development process and they're involved in that review process. But in order for them to begin the review process, they needed a concept. That does not mean the council can't come back at some point and say, let's go from 4 to 3. You know, and if you want to make it a higher quality plant, you know, do that too. It's all going to come down to funding and financing and what they're going to be able to secure as far as the loan. So in response to your question, it's a concept you're obligated to submit the scenario for, but there is flexibility as the process goes. The Water Development Board is in lockstep with you in that process of changing that concept if you get the loan.
Have you already made the revisions to the application that you voted on at the last council meeting?
Yes, ma'am. Those were submitted right after that council.
And just to clarify that was to use city revenues and ad valorem tax to back the loan?
Absolutely not. That was to use, as the first quarter of reimbursing the loan, existing city revenues and revenues from the existing wastewater customers to refund that loan. If in the event those revenues did not exist, at that point, the city would commit to an ad valorem tax to repay that design and engineering loan. But as we pointed out at that time, and as we communicated to the board, we feel we have more than enough money at this stage of the game to avoid going ad valorem for the design and engineering on that project.
The $100,000 that the council voted to put towards the wastewater system,
Yeah.
where does that come from? What are we not going to get in the budget because that money got taken out?
That will be a decision that will be made in the budget process each year where that $100,000 comes. I think it would be difficult to say, you know, right now that every year it's going to come from this particular aspect of our budgeted operation. But it will be a decision that we make in the budget. They know that obligation's out there, and they're going to have to find the existing revenues to meet that obligation.
So it could get taken from roads.
It could get taken from a number of different sources.
Because we're talking about ad valorem tax as a means to fund roads at council meetings too, so I just wanted to make that point. So at this point, I'm kind of skeptical of the process because the community's been left out of the process, and I would feel a lot more comfortable knowing exactly what option that we were going to do before moving forward. Maybe do preliminary engineering, but I'm just not comfortable without knowing what option.
So the options, can I ask you this question? Of the options that are on that board, which one is more favorable to you, Ms. Stephanie?
I think option 5 is the most favorable to me, but I don't think it's represented correctly. And I would also like to ask that when you do cost comparisons on wastewater treatment plant facilities, you usually do it as a net present value so that you're looking at the life cycle cost. These are just the present day costs. They don't include the operations and the maintenance over the life of the facility. So option 5 is at a disadvantage because you're just looking at the present day costs, although it's not correct anyway. But I'd like to see a net present value that includes the maintenance costs, because
You know, we can look at that, but I think when we're talking about ad valorem tax, we're talking about paying construction at this time. As we pointed out in the beginning, this is pure and simply modeled to show the impact of paying for construction. Net present value goes into when you're looking at the construction. The operating costs are going to be paid for by the customer in this situation. And the majority of the people, a strong majority of the people who would be paying in this particular scenario would not be customers and would not be burdened with the O&M costs. So that's why, so as not to confuse people, it's not there. But you're exactly right on what you're saying.
And I'd like to see an option 5A and an option 5B, and the 5B be where the city is willing to give up their CCN for the square and revert back to the plant there. I mean, how many people would mind if the city released their CCN so that Aqua Texas could serve like they're doing on the other side of the creek? It resolves the failing septic systems. And how many council members, when they ran for election, if you could raise your hand, said you were not going to support ad valorem taxes? Thank you. Sorry to take so much time.
I'm Scott Johnson. I live on Sabino Ranch. First of all, I think this is great. We've got a room full of people. We've got differences of opinion. We're talking about it. Sometimes you get some emotions going. It's all good. It's for a very good purpose. I don't believe there's anyone in this room that doesn't believe we can improve how we live in this community, in this environment. So this is great. I was a little concerned. What I heard tonight was there's a sense of urgency now. We know, you heard my dad, I mean, been talking about this for a long time, so I guess you could say there's a sense of urgency because we've not done anything. But the city's only had this responsibility for 2 years, and now there's a sense of urgency. Y'all realize how much it's been raining in the past couple, 3 years, and you know with low water flow, E. coli ratings go up. High flow water, E. coli ratings go down. So it's just natural that it's getting worse because our flow rate's going down. That's a whole other discussion. I did think it would be kind of neat to look back a little bit in the city. And I'm going back to 2008, and this is from the Economic Development Strategy. Page 15, improvements to infrastructure. Wimberley lacks sufficient infrastructure. The goal, state-of-the-art wastewater treatment for the square and adjoining areas. The task, provide wastewater treatment to the square and adjoining areas. This is 2008. Later in the same document, there is a consensus that any economic development should be harmonious with the scale, look, and feel of the existing community. Preserve the natural beauty and protect the environment. It is clear what is not wanted. Anything large scale, anything that consumes large amount of water resources, anything that would destroy the unique character of the city and the valley. Unquote. Clearly a waste treatment plant at Blue Hole Park is the wrong location. It sits on top of Blue Hole, Cypress Creek, and next to Blanco. Gail mentioned Dr. Ross in her recent report in November of 2011 and what's happening with surface treatment of treated effluent in this area, on parched areas. And this is new information. This study's been going on for years, and this is a good publication. It's a short read, about 35 pages. Very interesting. The Cypress Creek Watershed Project has a saying: we want to keep Cypress Creek clean, clear, and flowing. We all do. Within that project, using the Clean Water Act, there are provisions for funding. I'm not aware that any member of the city, and we have people sitting on the stakeholders committee, has approached that group for funding since it directly addresses clean water, and we're talking about downtown. We have white papers, we have science, we have study already done on this section, and we're in the stage of that project where funding is getting very specific. I agree with Gail Pigg. This is a biased presentation. There's a lot of good information. There's a lot that's not there. And City Council, I would hope in the next forum that we can also have some rebuttals from the crowd during the presentation. It would help, I think, quid pro quo on filling in the blanks when we see something that maybe not quite complete. Thank you.
Let me jump in real quickly and say, first things first, I'm a member of that stakeholder group, and I was at the meeting where there actually was a presentation made. Scott, I don't know if you were absent that day, but there was actually a presentation made by Mr. Klepper, who's also a stakeholder on the committee, regarding the wastewater system and what was being discussed. And there did not seem to be an active movement among that group to move forward and try to adopt that particular project. That project is not done. I'll also tell you this, there is clean water funding money available. That money requires matches. Exactly what I told you. Number one, the funding available is becoming more limited, but it also requires matches. You can't get free money anymore. And so I think it's important to keep in mind, and also that funding is limited from the standpoint of paying for an entire project. It can be used to pay for the replacement of septic systems, but the problem we've run into, as we've talked about before tonight, and that is the fact that you can't replace a lot of these septic systems because you don't have the land and the open space necessary to bring them into compliance. Go ahead, Madonna.
My name is Madonna Kimball, and I live in the city limits. And I have some questions and concerns that obviously don't have anything to do with technical ones, because I don't know anything about that. But something that I heard the other day that I had never thought of, and there was a comment made that maybe you can answer this. How much of these, when you show these levels, how much of these levels can you determine what is actual human waste from septic systems as opposed to cattle, ducks, geese, yada yada?
The answer to the question is what right now is it's a general draw that's taken and analyzed for a coli compost. What we're about to embark on is we're about to embark on a study that we're going to be using some different labs that are going to look closer at the water studies that are going to actually try to determine markers. For example, you might be able to determine caffeine content in the sample and determine if maybe it's coming from a place that has a lot of caffeine that's being put into the wastewater system, i.e. restaurant, those type of things. We're about to start doing that more. The problem we run into is the topography we're up against. And while we may find that content, being able to trace that back is very difficult. Bill talked about the history, of what they did as far as the mass flush and those type of things. In the past, they've also tried to do dye testing. The thought process would be, why don't you put dye in the toilet in the septic system and see where it comes up? Maybe that's the way to do it. They did that in some systems and it never came up. It's difficult to figure out where it is going to come up. It's a challenge. It truly is a challenge, and it's nothing that we're not afraid to go up against. We're going up against it right now. Let me go into another quick, I don't want to take the time, but a little bit of explanation that I want to touch on what we're having to do as a result of what we're dealing with right now. And that is the fact that every time a business changes hands in our downtown area right now, we're requiring them to come in and get a CO, a certificate of occupancy. And as a result of that process, they've got to show us that their septic system has the capacity to meet exactly what they're going to be producing based on the estimates, but also that it's functioning properly. And it has stopped some planned development downtown already. And I can tell you in the past, that's not been done. And I'm not pointing fingers at the past, but the county was not aggressive in the enforcement process and aggressive in the review process because, quite frankly, they had a very large service area to handle. We're able to do that, but it's going to get more and more difficult as we progress in this problem without a solution on board. And I can tell you a number of property owners who've encountered it, and it's not fun because we're telling people no, and we don't like to do that. And the thought process is that if we can get a solution, we can hopefully avoid that and actually work for the benefit of those who are trying to better this community.
I have another question. I keep hearing that the city doesn't have money for this, the city doesn't have money for that, and I understand that. But last night I sat at a meeting where you talked about, and I know that what's happening on the square is being paid by the county. but I was a little bit confused at where we're getting $100,000 for a landscape contract to take care of 4 trees and a pansy garden on the square. Maybe we ought to use a little bit of common sense and maybe not spend money on that kind of thing and put it where we need it.
I think it's a hang on. I think it's important to be factual. And that is, no one said $100,000. We said there was $100,000 for the landscaping going in, and that the city would be paying for a contract. We in no way would pay $100,000 for a landscaping contract. Our thought process is we're probably looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $15,000 to $20,000, and it may not even be that high. We won't know until we put the bid out. Basically, what she's talking about is the downtown project that's underway that involves sidewalks, that involves the installation of traffic islands, that involves some beautification efforts downtown, that resolve drainage issues. And it's a project that in large part is being funded by the state through Prop 12 funding and also through actual TxDOT funding. And then the county, through a bond issue that the people in this county approved several years ago, some of that county bond money is going towards that particular project. The city's contribution to that project occurred several years ago when the project was originally discussed, and that involved the cost of designing the drainage that's going into that project.
Do those permits require additional water?
Those permits will require some irrigation, drip irrigation, yes. Drip irrigation. And it's going to be a drought tolerant vegetation that goes in. The state has the contract.
My other questions are more geared toward fairness. What about the people who have just opened businesses recently and had to pay $15,000 to $20,000 for a septic system? Are they also going to have to, I've understood that they're also going to have to hook onto the sewer to pay this hookup fee, is that correct?
Well, one of the things that has been discussed in the MMD process on that particular issue is recognizing the fact that there are a handful, not a lot, but there are a handful. One is important enough, but there are a handful of people who put in some new systems that were able to get a compliant system in place. Only a handful. But the thought process was it's not really fair to require them to come in and connect. You know, and so there's been thought process that if and when we get a system, that we would somehow figure out a way to, for lack of a better phrase, defer their immediate connection for a period of years to the point that they get some value out of the investment that they've made.
There's other systems they already had in place.
Or for a certain period of years, like 5 or 7 years, whatever type of lifespan you can have.
Okay, that makes sense. Another question is, there's a building on the square that I understand that has been told that they have to pay the hookup. This little building is a senior citizen's craft shop. There is not a pipe, a drop of water, a sink, a commode, anything in that building. Are they still going to be required to pay this hookup even though they have absolutely no usage?
The answer to that question is every property within the district, when the service becomes available to them, is going to be obligated to connect.
Even though they don't have any service whatsoever. That's going to put that little business out of business, you know that, right? And there's probably a few other businesses on the square that this hookup fee and this monthly fee is going to put out of business.
My belief is that there are going to be a couple of those issues that, you know, if we're able to get this far down the road, to be able to make those type of decisions. There are going to be